Thank you. What an honor to be here today. This is my first trip to Stockholm, but I'll tell you about my quality of life, but right now is a quality of life moment that I get to be in front of this many people that care deeply about service and care about design. So thank you. So it was just mentioned that I had the opportunity to be a fellow at the Stanford University D.school last year. This is a picture of my cohort of fellows. And I could have shown you 100 pictures of myself with my family, which matter deeply to me, but this is such an exciting moment. In this group are a lawyer, a U.S. naval officer who's a Navy SEAL trainer, a serial entrepreneur from Argentina, a sitting member of the San Francisco United School Board, an editor from the Washington Post, and a principal from East Palo Alto High School. And we were all brought together by Stanford to be different and to be the same, to learn from each other. So it was a remarkable experience. I'm going to reflect a little bit on that. And you can just see the exuberance here. We've just gone through an exercise where we're sort of putting onto stickies on our chests the things that matter most to us and opening up, and that was the spirit. And that's the spirit which I come to you today. How many people in the room have aging parents? There may be some that don't, sadly, anymore, but we all have had aging parents. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why that matters and why that matters to a large financial services company and what we're doing about it. But first, because I'm not in the United States, I want to just tell you a little bit about Fidelity Investments. I'm based in Boston. I have been with Fidelity for 24 years. Much of that time I spent designing our websites, and then I moved into a broader role as Chief Customer Experience Officer about 3 years ago in our innovation team. Fidelity is the largest mutual fund company in the United States, but we're probably best known as the provider of retirement savings for many and a large number of corporations within the United States. And we also have an international presence. In fact, at the end of this week, I get to go visit our team in Dublin. So as I said, I've been with Fidelity for 24 years. This is the original design of Fidelity.com, which I did with some tabbed notebooks and sort of thought about how it might be organized. This is something I did in 1995. I'd been there for about 4 years. And we thought through what the inside might look like. At the time, I didn't know the terms design thinking or service design. But I did know what a metaphor was, and I thought hard about what people would like to see. In 1997, we launched the first integrated version of our website. And you can see those tab names are just about what we mapped out on the cardboard folders. Some of you might recognize the Netscape logo on the top, just to prove this really is a original screenshot. What we did at that time was really extremely advanced. For the first time, individuals had access to the kind of information that only professional traders had had previously. So what happened between 1996, when we launched that website, and 10 years later, was that we went from 2% of our customer transactions and interactions being electronic, which that's amazing that we had 2%, to 96%. So that's the biggest reason I have been in my job for 24 years, because it was really being in the right place at the right time, and taking something that is financial services is always a service, and being able to design the way people experience it was pretty great opportunity. This is what it looks like today. Notice the tabs? Pretty much I could go back to my cardboard manila folder, but that basic interaction, we either got it right or we created what was right for people, because the information architecture was extremely important and has sustained itself. But here's the issue. Despite the great information architecture and the tremendous information, this is what most people see. In fact, it looks a little bigger. They see their login, and they log in, and they see a number, and then what do you think they do? More often than not, log out. Log out or go somewhere else. So the question became, how do we engage people in a richer way? How do we help people not be preoccupied with what the number is today and what the change is today, but think about what they need to do for their futures? And that brought me to Stanford. How many people here have had the opportunity to get to Stanford University in Palo Alto? Good number, but I'd invite you out there. And at Stanford, this is in 2006, David Kelly, who also founded IDEO, and George Kemble, who's become a mentor of mine, were founding the Stanford D.school. The D.school is, in a way, a misnomer, because it is not a school that grants degrees. It is a true interdisciplinary program. So as it was the case in my fellowship, all of the classes have graduate students from the law school, the medical school, the business school, the journalism school, the engineering school, the School of Arts and Sciences. And students are brought together into groups that are composed of one of each of those. And so there's not a designer. Everybody's a designer on those teams. And big problems are thrown to teams at the D-school. So one of those big problems that we submitted and sponsored a class was the savings problem. How do you get young people to save money? How do you get young people to save money to the extent that they often do not, and do not even take the free money that their employer offers to them? And we watched the students dig into this challenge. And the first thing they told us, this is one of the student presentations, is, we don't know what you're talking about. You're not speaking our language. And it's hard to hear when you think you have the architecture right and things make sense. In fact, they proposed an ad campaign for us, which we did not run. By the way, 401k is a retirement savings plan. You probably recognize the other abbreviation. But the point was, speak to us in our language. But the students also did a lot of research and a lot of empathy work, and they talked to people my age. And one of the things that they found is that people my age remember vividly going to the bank with their parents, so much so that they can tell you exactly where that passbook is to this day that they had, and they can tell you all the details about that passbook. And I said to myself, yes, that's right. This is actually the same book. I said, yes, up in the drawer and in my family's house in Vermont is the passbook that has the records of all the money, you can figure out exactly how old I am, that I saved in the summer of 1978 when I was working as a waiter in a summer resort up in Vermont. But not only that, I could remember what it smelled like. I could remember the sound of the typewriter behind the desk. I could remember the feeling of accomplishment when I went in and out of the bank. And so we realized the huge insight from the students was that had been lost in our version of Fidelity.com. That had been lost in an electronic world where everything was based on the moment, based on yesterday, based on the future. So we redesigned a performance page to look a lot like my passbook and other people's passbooks and bring it up to date to try to create for people that sense of accomplishment and that emotional tie to their finances. And it was very successful and moved the needle. I don't say it transformed things, but moved the needle in the amount of time that people spent reflecting and created a sense of accomplishment. So what those students did, and I'm sure many people are here are familiar with one form or another of the design thinking cycle. This is straight from the Stanford D.school. What the students done is they had been empathetic. They had understood people's stories. They had defined a need for something being intangible. They had ideated and tried alternatives. They prototyped them in a rougher form than we were comfortable doing things. They tested it, and they'd cycled back through that. This is another slide from the D.school that we have posted prominently in our office now. And these are really the core principles behind design thinking and service design: to be human-centered, to have a bias towards action, to radically collaborate, and to create an attitude where we show things to people before we tell them how good they are for them. So I'll show you just some pictures as evidence from projects that we now do, and then talk about the current project. So we started to have sessions like this. Well, what's interesting about this session is that the gentleman in the gray sweater is a Fidelity customer, and the thing he's interacting with is written in a ripped piece of paper on a whiteboard. For us previously, that would have been very hard. We wanted to get things right. We wanted to have them polished before we put them in front of our customers. Or this picture, a similar one, where the thing that's different here, it's the customer doing the talking. My Fidelity colleagues have their backs to you, and they are listening. Sometimes I have to grab them and put my hand on their mouth, but they are listening, and they're listening hard to what the customer thinks is important in this prototype, which is just written in dry erase markers. Or this picture where we're testing. And the screens here are not done in HTML or Photoshop. The screens are done on a 3x5 card with a pen, and the pen is at the designer's hand. And the whole team is incredibly engaged in what's going on. I heard the term this morning, we'll hear it some more, I'm sure, over these 2 days, we're co-designing with our customers. The customer is the gentleman in the sweater laying out how he thinks his financial statement should look for us, and we're listening hard. With those kinds of inputs, our teams are able to generate radically more ideas than we have before. This is a picture of a cross-functional team just blasting out ideas, and we have challenged them to come up with 100 ways to solve a problem. In that group, there's a designer, a developer, a business person, a marketing person, and a person from our legal department very often. So we're putting them together, and they're generating things in a radical fashion. And then some of our prototypes look like this. Here's a prototype of an advice truck, a financial advice truck. Well, if you have the idea of a financial advice truck, granted this is being tested on the Stanford campus, you can make a truck out of cardboard. And what's important here is that the interaction, people immediately believe it's real, and they immediately interact with that prototype. And so here's Stade Fidelity Investments from Boston, Massachusetts, creating prototypes that look like this. We also spend time looking for analogous situations. Here I am with a team, and we're at a fire department. Why are we in a fire department? Well, a fire department is a place where there's an incredible service culture. And I've taken teams to many different fire departments all around the world now, in Boston, in Dublin, in North Carolina, in China. And there's a common thread that's remarkable in the attitude there. And so for our teams to see that kind of thing and hear it and exposed to it is visceral and important. Here we are working with one of our partners, JetBlue Airlines, spending time in an airport. Well, an airport is an analogous situation to financial services. You're anxious, you're out of control, and you hopefully know where you're going, but you're not sure when you're going to get there. So we take people to airports and have them understand what's going on. Cemeteries, there's a place where there's a sense of emotional need. So you will see this sign in our office. Fall in love with the problem, not the solution. We all fall in love with our ideas, and we all reinforce them, but we try to break that habit and get more people to fall in love with the solution. So my entry slide sort of told you the story. So 2006, we began with the Stanford D.school. And last year, I had the opportunity to go back as a Fidelity employee and be resident there, taking classes, teaching classes, and working on a Fidelity project. So I want to tell you about that project. This is a slide from the Stanford Center on Longevity, where I also spent quite a bit of time when I was at Stanford. It's really good news for everybody in this room. This is a chart that shows age based on not time from birth, but percentage probability of mortality. What is the percent chance you will die each year in aggregate? And what it shows is that if you define old age as the year when you first have a 2% chance of mortality, that has gone up steadily over the last 30 years, in fact, remarkably. This is another chart that shows the percentage, the mix of people by age group, and projects that by 2032 there will be more old people. I won't like that term because I'll be there. But old people as defined as over 65, then there will be children. So great news, right? What does that mean? What is the problem to fall in love with? Well, the question is back to the thing I asked you at the beginning. How many people have aging parents? How many of you, almost everybody raised their hand, have had a tough conversation with your aging parents about what the plan is for when they pass away? Show of hands. Wow, that's a lot less. How many of you have had a conversation with your aging parents about what you should do in the event that they have serious cognitive impairment and they're not able to function clearly? Good. Good for you. Those are hard, hard conversations. And we're learning that people all have stories, but they don't know how to get there. This is actually a picture of my mother and my daughter. And they're having that kind of conversation, and it's an interesting test. And they're not looking at each other. They love each other. They've spent a lot of time together, but it is a tough. You can just see the emotion. So when I was out at Stanford, I spent a lot of time focused on this and working with my colleagues and others to try to understand this, not from a financial services perspective, but from a human perspective, and just talking to people and trying to understand what they need. This is a terrific couple in their 80s. They've provided brilliantly for their grandchildren, but they were reflecting to me, opening right up in the first 15 minutes I'd known them, opening up to me about how difficult it was to talk to their own children. This is a woman that I met and her care provider. The other part of those charts I could show you is that women still have a longer life expectancy than men, and women tend to marry older men. So there is a great likelihood that there will be lots of widows in the world. And however, financial services companies like mine spend the majority of their time talking to those men who are likely to predecease their wives and not necessarily including them. And you end up with situations where the widow doesn't know really who the provider is of their financial services or have a good handle on things. So this is an empathy map. If you look at what people feel, they're lost, they're overwhelmed, they're insecure. They don't know where to start in these conversations, and they don't even know where to start in the things they're talking about. And fear is a prevailing attitude that sort of wraps people. So this is a picture of one of my teammates at Fidelity, the woman who's on the left, and we're out doing some empathy work in people's homes. And we are testing an online estate planning tool with this couple and trying to understand what their attitudes are and watching what happens in their environment. And we sort of formed a point of view about it. There's a 40s married couple from very different background, needs a way to just find a way to talk about their end-of-life plan and their finances. But there's always something else in the way. It couldn't have been more graphically brought home than in this next slide, in this next picture, where you can see who's now looking at our prototype. Our carefully crafted prototype is on the floor with the baby. And the couple is having what is beginning to be a heated discussion about their child's guardian. And that is forming a boundary for them that they're not going to get through without some help. These are just more pictures talking to people. It's, to me, remarkable how quickly people open up about this topic. These are women who have lost their husbands that I have organized for Stanford students to talk to and dig in and understand what happened in their lives and what their plan is and what their future brings. just people opening up to each other. It doesn't have to be. There's a commonality here. So what we have learned is that the family conversation, and you are a good representative, is incredibly important. Everyone has a story. Everyone has a story about a relative, a friend, or situation. And everybody wants to talk about how hard it is to actually have the conversation with their family member. So we don't have the solution immediately, but we've realized that the service we provide often starts with people. It can be rendered electronically, but we are creating a pattern and a method and trying to open up and change the dialogue. And this is one of my passions now, to change the dialogue that we have with people to get beyond the individual and to start thinking about the family. This is just a chart. It's one of our solutions. It's a piece of paper. But what's so different about it is if you would look at something from Fidelity previously, that column that's on the second from the left, it says retirement planning. That'd be the outside. We'd be talking about retirement. And we wouldn't be talking about what comes after that. We wouldn't be talking about income protection, and we wouldn't be talking about the family conversation, education, living expenses, children, parents, and how to tie that all together. This is a quote, I won't read you this whole thing, from one of our representatives who I've been working with on this program. And he's describing, he said, Dad's an old-style stock picker. Mom has no feel for family finance. And each is in time of significant health concerns, Parkinson's and cancer. The daughter brought everyone in to meet with me as the arbiter, one who could ask hard questions and deliver objective advice. And each came out with a victory. So this is new, that we think about the couple and their daughter and how we bring them together to reflect on the things that they need to do. So I'm going to wrap, because I'm about out of time, but I want to leave you with my thoughts on how you can create this kind of culture in a large organization that, especially in a financial services, people don't think of empathy and financial services in the same breath, or the same set. So how do we create that kind of culture? Teach people to listen. Those conversations, those pictures, love those pictures because there's such intensity in listening. And so I teach our teams to listen and create that culture, that people are good listeners. Find analogs. It is easier to solve sometimes for the analog than for your own, and think about, what would I do if I were an airline service person? What would I do if I was in a fire department? Use data to raise questions rather than to answer them. We typically are very good at using our data to answer questions and come to precise answers. But we try now more and more to use data to raise questions. This data from the Stanford Center on Longevity raise fundamental questions about what happens next. And there's all kinds of data inside of that that we stare at. And then use the data to tell us who to go talk to and who to listen to. Lead by example and be a student. And I'll leave you with one other thought. This is a picture of a friend of mine who I brought out to California last year just to change his perspective, senior person at Fidelity. And here's a quote from my friend George Kemble at the D.school. Your potential to impact the world has more to do with how you influence people to see things than in how much you produce. So thank you very much. Hopefully I've been able to influence the way you see things, and I look forward to the conversation later.